great discussions in here already this afternoon. I just want to tell you a little bit about what this event tonight is a part of, to give some context to our speakers. So this is actually part of a 2-day tour of the watershed, if you will. There was a teach-in yesterday in Shiprock, a community right along the San Juan River, to talk about planning and next steps and thinking about the health of our river and how to ensure a resilient and sustainable future for the river system, the Animas and the San Juan River. And that's coming out of a collaborative, multidisciplinary research project that our 3 guests here tonight are a part of. We have Dr. Carlotta Chief, Janine Yazzie, Dwayne Chiliazzi, and they formed a group about 2 years ago. It was the impetus for it was the Gold King mine spill, but it's really had this long-term impact on thinking about our watershed in a whole new way, thinking about health beyond just the water quality, but the health of the whole system and the health of the cultural systems and the social systems of a watershed. So this has been an ongoing research project. These are 3 representatives of that collaborative effort. There was a van of 15 Navajo community members that traveled up very early from Shiprock and Farmington this morning to go up to Silverton to learn more about the upper reaches of the watershed, to learn more about the mining, to learn more about the history of the work up in this part of the region, and to try to build some bridges and some partnerships and some relationships that go beyond kind of the borders that separate this river system, and really think about it as a whole. So that's what this evening is about, sharing stories across the watershed, to think about the health of our river in a much broader sense. And we have three distinguished speakers that are going to cover 3 different angles of thinking of watershed health. Dr. Carlotta Chief from the University of Arizona is going to think about collaborative research projects and what rapid assessment looks like, and what long-term health and monitoring of a river system looks like. Janine Yazzie is a community organizer, a community activist, nationally, internationally, and brings those lessons home to the Navajo Nation. And she'll speak about her work and building community strength and resilience. And Chiliazzi, the president of the chapter house, the Shiprock chapter. And I'll let him introduce himself, but he'll speak to the farming, the intergenerational, the worldviews, and the spirituality of river health. So they're going to each speak for about 15 minutes. So we can get a sense for who they are and the work that they do. And then we're going to open it up to really have this be a dialogue and ask questions that many of us that live in this part of the watershed don't know how to ask the questions about our downstream neighbors and what are the impacts. And so it's a way to just have a real open time to share stories and to ask questions. So we have other guests in the room that represent multiple agencies. Dennis McQuillan from New Mexico, that can speak to a lot of the work that our downriver state has been doing. We have representatives from EPA, many of the nonprofits in our community that helped host the event tonight, Mountain Studies Institute, San Juan Citizens Alliance, Animas Watershed Partnership, Animas River Stakeholders Group, the Grange that donated the space. So there's been a lot of community effort to put it on, and they're represented here. So we have a room full of folks that can hopefully help fill in the story for us. So thank you for being here. For our guests, before I forget, if you noticed a mile up the road, there's a honey farm, honey producers. So as a gesture from Durango, we'll have some honey for the 3 of you. So thank you for making the effort and sharing your stories with us.
Thank you, Becky. And Dr. Chief and my granddaughter here, She sounds exciting and powerful and informed and compassionate and driven and energetic. She's my granddaughter. My introductions by our clan of the Salt people were matrilineal people, by the way. My father is Tohedlini, waters coming together as in confluence. My mother's paternal clan is Tawawin House, Kia'ani. And my father's paternal clan is Kachi'i, right across the forehead. And my children are Kapaha, water dwellers. I am pleased to be here with you this evening. I am thankful for this opportunity to talk with you and share some of the thoughts and concerns that I represent here this evening. This evening I stand before you as Grandpa 8 times and Great-Grandpa 2 times. And I'm a farmer along the San Juan River in Shiprock. I'm a community leader, and I'm proud to just say those are my credentials. I will speak directly to the Gold King mine spill that we experienced in August of 2015. And I've been able to pen some words, and they still are the best expression of what we feel, what we experience. So please indulge me as I just read the statement. I titled this piece Yellow River. The farmer momentarily reposes in the dirt under the welcome shade of the tree. The half-grown corn are happily waving at him in the summer hot breeze. The irrigation water slowly trickles down the furrows through the rows of corn. He thinks about his farmer status after his years on the government payroll. I miss that job, but I've always wanted to be here in this hard, tiring, and happy work. He examines his rough hand getting smoothed down by his weed-killing hoe. He smiles as he sees his grandson bouncing toward him through the melon field. Shache, shache, the man on the radio said the river is turning yellow. Half joking, he says, my grandson. Maybe he said the river is turning mellow. Not sure what his pride and joy is babbling about. They start walking home. Shache, Ezra, we're going to have a good crop this year. Our melons are growing nice, and our chilies, tomatoes, squashes, and our ready-to-cut hay is purpling out. We'll make some good bucks this year. New clothes for school. I'm glad to be a farmer. The wife is quiet, serving lunch. Finally, she says, there's contamination in the river. Visiting the neighbor, tending his horses. Yeah, it don't sound good, Yellow River. They're going to give a full report at the community meeting this evening. Gotta be there. Our large chapter house is full of people. The concerned, the tired, the inquisitive. The tribal representative tells us an EPA contractor broke open an old gold mine up past Silverton that was holding back mine wastewater under great pressure. The early report is there may be 1 million gallons of mine waste coming our way. Different kinds of heavy metals in the wastewater causing the river to turn yellow. There are thousands of old mines in Colorado. This Gold King mine was shut down in 1923. Many of these old mines interconnect. The buildup of water inside those mountains caused a high pressure release when the mine was breached, releasing a torrent of waste. Over 3 million gallons of contaminated wastewater is coming in an 80-mile-long plume, moving 4 miles an hour with toxic heavy metals, including lead, mercury, and arsenic. Nobody knows the impact. We don't know what will happen. Our irrigation water is being shut off. We are confused, anger starting to boil. Our elders have sad, misty eyes. This is so surreal. I am frantically irrigating all the fields. Yellow plume supposed to reach us in 2 days. Irrigating all night into the next day. They turned the water off too soon, miscalculation. More and bigger meetings, government big dogs and tribal politicos converge on us. Cameras are whirring, media of every sort stumble over each other. International news. What are the facts? Who's at fault? EPA whimpering around. Did contamination pass us by? Oh man, what about our crops? What about the deers, the bears, the birds, and the wild horses? EPA says, yes, it's our fault. We'll make it right. Navajo prayers, yells, we're going to sue you, EPA. Navajo Incident Command Center confused. At least they look and sound impressive. EPA buys semi-loads of hay, hires water transporters to deliver desperate needed water, hires fracking fields water delivery outfit who quickly mobilizes trains of water tankers, filling massive black tanks that we found to be petrol tanks. Stupid EPA thinks we stupid. Get those dirty tanks off our lands. We reject these frack tanks, trucks, and operators. BIA kicks in, professional operation, sets up large water tanks up and down the river, trucking in water day and night from clean water source, Nappy Dam, Navajo Dam, Nappy Water. Good-hearted people, worldwide, sending cash, prayers, and truckloads of bottled water. Thank you, but it's the crops and animals that are thirsty, not us. Thank you for caring. Farmers and ranchers line up week on week for water, some with rickety trucks and old barrels. Animals are getting water. Stay away from the river, hauling water to crops in desperation. Test the water again. Water okay. Upriver communities and farmers using water. No, not us. It's impossible to water all the crops. Forget the alfalfa. Which crops do we save? Damn. Corns are thirsty and dying. Damn the EPA. Damn the government. Damn the industry. Still scrambling 1 month later, BIA pulls out. Navajo struggles to pick up the slack. Media's leaving town on to the next hot story. Navajo prayers still talking, EPA losing memory. Our poor corn has withered. Our precious melons dead on the vine. Life not fun no more. We tired, frustrated, angry. Brockovich is mad. Save few crops, somebody's gonna pay. Different testers test the river, no conclusions. Can't say extent of damage or if it's safe. Government says farmers will get compensated. Payday time, lawyers licking their chops. Water tests okay, Res Press says turn on the water. EPA steps out. Water must be okay, bye, bye, bye. Is it conspiracy? We don't trust the government. Unbiased universities say it seems okay, but these heavy metals are long-term deal. Any complication won't be seen for many years. Who do we believe? They all sound the same. Maybe it is okay. How do we know for sure? Our great dilemma is, do we turn on the water to farm and risk forever contamination? We are torn, we need water, but we must also preserve farms for coming generations. Farming is our life. Water is our life. This is our culture, our spiritual way. It's who we are. All we can do is hope and believe in our prayer. We will survive. Again, yes, we shall. Those words I began piecing together after we were hit with this deluge of this ecological disaster. Our farmers lost over 75% of our crops. And the way that we regard water, the intrinsic relationship that we have with water, is beyond just knowing that we must drink water to live. It's beyond looking at the beauty of the water going down the river. The relationship, the understanding, the knowledge that we have of water is greater than just seeing it as a physical entity. It's a matter of spirituality. We give our prayers to the water. It is such an integral part of us. So you can imagine the trauma, the tragedy that we were placed in when our river was damaged in this way. Those of us that have some inkling of understanding of those paradigms of appreciation of the real essence of water, we understand what our grandmas feel, what our grandpas feel. And the emotional trauma that they had to experience was this heartbreaking. And it continues. We don't know if the water is safe yet. We hear from all the researchers that it is safe, but we don't know. Last year, I would dare say that perhaps only 10% of our farmers farmed. This year was a little higher. Hopefully next year, we will come back to our farms. But I want to just say that I appreciate you this evening because it's a realization that there are people such as yourselves who have the heart and the compassion to try to understand the scope of our tragedy and to do what you can within your own realms of life experience to support us. I want to just appreciate you in that way. I want to appreciate Dr. Coletta Chief, who's given us the opportunity to stand here and tell you what is in our hearts. Finally, I will just say that as a further extension of that appreciation of you, to know, to understand what we are saying in our expression of what we feel about water. I can say that you must also have that same appreciation and compassion for the earth mother. And we're in a hard position, people, and I think we all know that. A gentleman by the name of Stephen Hawking says the life on this planet has only 100 years. So the driving force of my effort, my little babies, my grandbabies, our little children, our little grandbabies, your little grandbabies. What about them? What about their future? That is where we are, people. And it's so serious, the dilemma that we're in. And I just appreciate you that we can stand together here as good people and know that we must do our part. Thank you.
I think I can speak pretty loud too, but do you guys, is this okay as well? All right, I'll try to keep it down. Yaate share jini yazi and share. Tasa aninde nasha tsana jini shlendo torichi bashishi. Natlana dashiche do tilkaya shinala. I'm not from the communities along the San Juan River. I'm from the Perco Valley region. My hometown is called Tasa which means rock in place. And it's a small community that's on the border of Arizona and New Mexico. And my communities were impacted by the Church Rock uranium mill tilling spill of 1979. That's where our community story begins. And you know, Chile and his beautiful and powerful poetry asked a question: how do we know for sure? That's a question that haunts my communities in various ways, and something that is a legacy of this event, the Gold King mine spill, and what took place and how it impacted all of our people who depend upon that life source. In my communities, that question went unanswered for many years after the Church Rock uranium mill tilling spill, but it didn't render invisible the impacts, at least not from our perspective, from the people who live along and build their families and their lives along that sub-watershed basin. And so around the same time that the Gold King mine spill took place, I was working with a research team to conduct a uranium water quality testing project along the Perco Valley to build the data and the effort to answer that question: how do we know for sure our water is safe? And what we found out was that it wasn't. In fact, several of our community wells were contaminated with uranium above acceptable drinking levels, including a homeowner's allotment, the Sanders Elementary School, Middle School, administrative buildings, and the teachers' housing that serviced over 5 communities in our region. So children from Head Start to 8th grade were being chronically exposed to water from the school system that was over 2 times the accepted drinking limit with uranium. And my son was at that school, is going to school there. I went to school there. So we were preparing in August of 2015 to let our communities know about the results that we got back when the Gold King mine spill hit. And so I was already working with Shiche, Chile, and several of the other grassroots organizers from the Shiprock area, like Daniel So and Dine Kerr. And so my heart was already there as well, because the water connects us, it brings us together, and we have an obligation and responsibility to respond to these issues and to these events in ways that protect our communities, because the only way we can ever find out is how to answer that question: how do we know for sure? Is if we make the sacrifices and make the effort to answer that question for ourselves. I came from in a region that experienced a very traumatic event that completely changed the way that we lived in relationship to our land. It destroyed our ability to continue to sustain ourselves and cultivate the food systems that we depended upon. It reduced greatly the subsistence practices and the traditional stewardship practices that we practice in that region. And I didn't want to see the same thing happening to the communities that were living along the San Juan River. And so we brought those experiences with the group that I was working with, Tobin Nahidzil, which means our water is our strength. and it is a collective of young community organizers that were dedicated to promoting water security and food security across the Navajo Nation. And so 5 days after the spill, we had our first teach-in in the San Juan River Basin, where we brought community members into this space, the Shiprock Youth Complex, and we had some very real, candid conversations about what was going on from our perspective. And that laid the foundation for us realizing not only how different we were understanding our vulnerabilities, our weaknesses, our risks, and our fears, but also what we were capable of and the type of resources we had in each other as relatives and as people with different life experiences, but also as professionals and students and people with different skills and expertise that could contribute to helping the community find the answers that they sought. And so, and since then, you know, we were lucky enough, and Dr. Chief is going to cover this in more detail, but we were lucky enough to connect with one of our own professionals who came as a full package in herself, and brought together a multidisciplinary team that literally answered many of the questions that the community members were raising in that first community meeting. But I wanted to share with you some of the things that came out when we brought people together. Not only the deep pain and the trauma that was so eloquently reflected in Chili's words, but there was also an undeniable hope and resiliency and strength and determination to survive. And in those conversations, the community not only focused on wanting to know all the impacts, not just looking at the water as a resource and waiting for it to go back to baseline levels, but understanding how this living system was being impacted and how then it was going to impact all the other forms of life that were dependent upon this sacred element. And in those conversations, the beauty and the understanding of our interconnectedness and our relationship to one another took forefront in how we started to address this very traumatic event. Not only that, but the community members were very solution-oriented. It wasn't about tragedy and being victims or being marked as being victims. They wanted to know, what are we going to do? Because this is showing us that there's a threat upstream that we need to mitigate and we need to take care of and we need to build solutions for. It wasn't about suing the EPA or the parties responsible. That's not a long-term solution, and it was definitely not a solution that was adequate enough to address all the multifaceted ways that the community and their children were being impacted by being witnesses to this event. Because one of the things that came out in that was the trauma was real. It was touching upon historical experiences and historical trauma and wounds that haven't been healed, but it was already in that process being passed down to the next generation. And you know, that happens not only in very real, palpable, emotional, mental ways, but also in physical and biological ways, as we were finding out from our own investigation into the legacy of uranium contamination in my communities. You know, the birth cohort study led by Dr. Chris Shuey ended up around the same time, also showing how the contamination of uranium, of an exposed pregnant mother, the contamination could be passed down to the fetus. And so for Native women, because you know, I was a part of that study when I was pregnant with my baby girl, that means that has an even deeper implication. Your exposure to that metal during your pregnancy now, if you're carrying a daughter, not only passes to your daughter, but a female fetus develops all of the eggs she'll carry in her lifetime in the womb. So the daughter, if that uranium's in her body, it's in her eggs. 3 generations impacted.
Oh.
We had, and we weren't willing to give up our agency in figuring out how do we make sure that that doesn't happen from this Gold King mine spill. How do we proactively organize ourselves so that we're looking at these multifaceted impacts and we're preparing ourselves as relatives for supporting one another and building with each other the solutions that we needed to protect ourselves, because that's the only way we can answer that question, how do we know for sure? And so it's an honor to be here, not only, again, standing by two of the most amazing leaders and mentors and just fascinating, intelligent people that I know, but to meet all of you and to see the faces on the other side of the river that we're connected to and that we're related to because of our investment in our communities and each other and in the health and safety of our children and future generations. And so, one of the things that I did want to bring to the discussion and wanted us to recognize in this space that we're creating is that this is an evolution. It's better than a revolution. Everyone's always talking about revolution. We don't need any more revolutions. That's reactionary. This is an evolution of a human-based movement for a better future, a more sustainable future, a more just future for all people and all life forms that are connected to water. And this is an evolution that is so desperately needed across the world. What we're going through here is not much different than what happened in Flint, Michigan, what's happening in the New York states or the New York communities that are impacted by fracking, and the Pennsylvania communities impacted by fracking, and West Virginia impacted by coal mining. It's not much different than what's happening around the globe. And that's part of the work that I do, is working with community members and tribal leaders from different areas in the United States and Canada, as well as in different places around the globe, where they're desperately trying to answer that question: how do we do this for ourselves? How do we take our power back? What does healing look like that can help us transcend these geopolitical imaginary boundaries, these imagined and man-made concepts that have divided our communities and our peoples for so long, that have subjugated us to systems of injustice for far too long? How do we take the knowledge, the skills, and the resources we have access to connect to each other as human beings and change the course of our destiny? And we have this meeting, this gathering, this space we're creating here has every potential to answer that question. If we can sit here as relatives and we can create that vision and create that goal with one another and start a path towards actualizing and committing to building these solutions that we know we all seek, will be the answer to how to change that paradigm. And so I look forward to that discussion, and thank you. It's an honor to be here and to be among so many amazing, caring leaders, professionals, scientists, citizens, brothers and sisters. And I look forward to what we can build together.
Shike doshida da qua santa solti ki IC Bahens and aro qua an hata hos I gift aro the jona gojian data IC behuisali a call head sen aro said the whole day say she toraji in shleto to the bashishin aro the sane da she do ya ida da tachi da shana a call with I the sun shle do man shle do a kota de Hansen aro the taji brate isi nasha ade shia ho adeya le hosto da ade nashnesh hota da otagi ade tonashka aro nakishia hodo ako kota shigarna de ako Shinanta Shiche Chiliazi Ba Henson Aron Dashadeja Janine Thaw Ako Kodal Nashnashiki IC Shishinle Shijay hit the net na Ako IC Shishinle Ako Aro Kadeba Lagana Getcha Hadesi. Good evening. Thank you everyone for having us here, to welcoming us to your community, and then also for the food that was provided here. It was very delicious, and I I was full from the delicious food. And thank you so much for Lewis College, for Dr. Clausen and Mountain Studies and the Grange and all the community members that are hosting us. It's wonderful to be here. And I also very honored to work with my leader, Chili Yazi, and my sister, Janine Yazi, in this work. It really touches my heart, and it's a real honor to work with them and to work with my people. And how I identify myself is I'm Bitterwater people, born for near the water people, and my maternal grandfather is Mini Goats, and my paternal grandfather is Red Running Into the Water. So by these 4 clans, that's how I identify myself as a Navajo woman, as a mother, and as a wife. I have 2 sons, and my children are born for the Japanese and African American people. And I'm currently an assistant professor at the University of Arizona, where I study water. And so that's what I explain myself in my language. And that's how I establish relationship with every one of you, is how I identify myself. That's the way my life ways are that's the lifeline that I carry to this day. So that's what I explain in Navajo. Sometimes Navajo is hard to directly translate into English, but that's what we say, that's our lifeline. And I'm here today to share my perspective and my journey and my role here. I'm originally from Black Mesa, Arizona. That's where I was raised. My family lived right by the Black Mesa mine, which is within the Peabody-Lisle area. And my family was heavily impacted by the mine. My grandmother lived so close to the mine that the explosions from the land strip mining caught her corral on fire. So her corral burned down, and we were forced to move further west. And growing up, I didn't have electricity or running water. I was quite isolated. And yet, I became into this role in my family where I became a translator. And I asked a lot of questions about what was happening in my community, why we didn't have electricity or running water, but yet just nearby was Peabody Coal Company generating megawatts of electricity for Las Vegas, Tucson, and LA, and using pristine water. And I grew up taking a shower once a week, and we went to the bathhouses at Black Mesa Mine, and we took family baths there once a week. And we hauled water, and I remember distinctly as I was growing up carrying a bucket of water up the hill, and how we conserve water. And I was very intrigued by water, and just very curious about water and where it was in the environment, and then asking questions about why my family was impacted so negatively by this mine. And that started my journey towards where I am today. It has motivated me to pursue higher education, to find a way to come back and help my people. And I believe that through this project, the Gold King Mine Dine Exposure Project, that I have come full circle in that I have been able to come back and help my people. So that's why I say it's a true honor to be here with these 2 leaders, to work with them to address an issue that deeply impacts our people. Because I also relate to it as well in my community. many of my elders, though they're not minors, they passed away from black lung disease and other forms of cancer. So I really relate to the impacts of mining on communities and families, and that is also what fueled me to do what I do. And it's truly an honor, and it has brought me back. As my grandmother always said, "Shnalen khandi ta, hakoshi na na le kentata ishi, ishin kato ishi bana na de yego ente, to yego nsenkes to yego na inish. Ako ishi benachet na khandi ta, to nihik e bakandi lo, wadasha kinila." So my grandmother charged me with this responsibility, where she said, wherever you may travel, what you may do, far away from this home, working hard, studying hard, thinking, all of those, but remember that with that process, you must come back and help our people and help our family. So that's really what drives me from what my grandmother told me, is that responsibility to come back to my people. And many times I think it may not be exactly what she envisioned for me, but that it is a way that I have found my niche to utilize my education to help address the questions that arise from environmental challenges and find a way to work together, not only amongst the scientists that I collaborate with, but also really it's the community, and the knowledge that they have is very, very valuable. And I think of my own grandmother, and I think of her as a scientist as well, because she knows the land so well, you know, the plants, the sheep, the horses, the birds. She's an ecosystem ecologist in her own community, but in a different way. And I think that through my work, I always respect that. And it's an honor to bridge that from science to my community. And when I first started my PhD journey, I wanted to do that, but it wasn't supported. My faculty advisor said, Black Mesa hydrology has been heavily studied. You can't get your PhD doing that work. And so I was discouraged, and I ended up doing post-fire research and other impacts to Watershed aside from my own community. And then I went on and pursued a postdoc at Desert Research Institute. However, it wasn't until I came back to the University of Arizona that, as through my extension appointment in the College of Ag and Life Sciences, that I found that way to come back to my community and really start to fulfill the promise that I made to my grandmother, which is come back. She said, "Come back, granddaughter, come back and help our people." So that's my role here today, and thank you for allowing me to share my perspective. Ahead.
Thank you again. again so much for sharing your story. The whole theme of embodying your story and hearing it in your voice. I know you could feel it in the room. I really could, how it touched 100 people that probably haven't had exposure to these stories before. Thank you. So now we have time to hear your thoughts, your questions, to direct to our panelists. Is there anybody that wants to start with a question?
It's a great question. For those of you who didn't hear it, she said, what's your name? Kim said, what do we say to our children? How do we get them involved? And I forgot and what I was going to say, to thank you guys for bringing your kids here. It starts with a move as simple as that. Our kids are going to be inheriting struggles beyond what we can imagine right now. Even though it seems hard, and even though a lot of people have lost a lot of hope this last election, I don't know why, this has been happening over and over again, but this last election have really felt this loss of hope in many communities that I've been working with. And what we say in our communities as well is make space for the children, make space to bring kids into these spaces. They understand so much more than we give them credit for. They are much easier to teach and to give the skills that are necessary to change this paradigm we're living in, as opposed to wasting all of our energy speaking to minds that won't change. We need to invest and plant the seeds into the generation to give them the skills they need to realize their power and their capacity to be the leaders that we need for a real, just, and sustainable world. And we need to respect each other's children in that capacity. We need to teach them and reach out to them and restore that basic foundation of community. It takes a community to raise a child. So when you see children in these spaces, protect them, congratulate them, tell them to listen, tell them to sit still, be those mentors. Because when they find that quiet, their ears and their minds and their hearts absorb so much. And I've seen that with my own two children. I take them to all the meetings that I go to. They're activists and they don't even know they're activists. It's just a lifestyle to them. Because I know that what they're going to face, no matter how traumatic and how much pain we carry from our own experiences, from our own lifetimes, they're going to be fighting for access to clean water. They're going to be fighting for access to clean air. They're going to be fighting people that would rather keep them powerless and exploit them to continue to concentrate and maintain an unsustainable system of power. And we have to give them everything we can, every minute that we can, to prepare them for that battle and to rise up as the warriors and leaders that they need to be.
Tell them the truth. And how that truth is, how that will be a reality in their own lives directly. They'll understand. They're intelligent people.
Has anybody been accountable for the uranium and the coal mine? When you say the people impacted by it, has there been any repercussions for those companies? Has there be people that push for repercussions for those companies? And if there hasn't, how do you go about that? Where do you start?
For the uranium mining, no. There were several settlements. A lot of people like to talk about settlements. But when you engage in settlement discussions or negotiations or any type of litigation like that with these type of companies, the system is structured for you to lose no matter what. $15 million as a uranium cleanup is not even enough to compensate for the loss of one life, let alone for the devastation through multiple generations that it wreaked upon my communities. And even now, even though we have these huge settlements for cleanup, I think one of the biggest ones was correct me if I'm wrong, is it 550? No, that must have been something. Yeah, close to 500 million. We don't know what cleanup looks like. These guys don't know what cleanup looks like. There are families that still live along the site of the Church Rock uranium mine and where the mill tillings break took place, and they are devastated. They can't even be relocated with that money. They're still living there. And one of the things that we've recognized, I think, among different grassroots groups is that when we're reactionary and when we're trying to hold these guys accountable by the systems of power that they control, they waste our energy and they waste our resources and they waste our capacity to build solutions that matter. When we organize among ourselves and when we build the solidarity and that united vision with many voices, one of the things that people always say is one nation, one voice, right? That's not unity, that's dictatorship. When we have one vision and many voices, and we recognize and support each other's strength, and we hold each other accountable to that vision, we are much more powerful than any litigation or any suit or anything a company can pay out. And it's even better we set a foundation for continuing to exercise and exert that power into the future, so that our communities aren't duped into deals, our projects, our proposals that compromise the public and environmental health and the long-term sustainability of our people.
In my community of Black Mesa, we started a nonprofit called Black Mesa United about 12 or so years ago, and that was to bring the people who live within the leasehold area together to address the lack of services, because it was like a freeze. We were in a leasehold area, so therefore the land is leased to Beachbody, and Navajo Nation wasn't moving forward on land development, community services. So we came together to talk about that and try to proactively address the services and advocate for services. And the one we really push forward is water, bringing water to the people. And so we did marches to Winter Rock and wrote a needs assessment. We received a small grant from Indigenous Environmental Network to document the elders and their recollection from the early days of the impacts. And some of those elders are now gone, so we really treasure their voices in that documentary. And recently we were able to get funds designated from the Indian Health Service, as well as the lawsuit that the Navajo Nation had entered into related to the royalties, to fund phase 1 of the Mini Mules Waterline project. But there are 5 phases. The leasehold area is quite large, and so we're continuing working together at the community level, just basically like Janine was saying, just trying to work together at the community level to organize, take action, and make our voices heard.
I just wanted to add to that too, because what Dr. Chief is talking about is an event that is known to be one of the largest forced relocations in recent U.S. history. They removed thousands of families from the Black Mesa region, forced them to relocate to others, and the largest concentration, and this happened in the 70s. This wasn't too long ago. This is since the Indian Wars. This was the largest forced relocation. And so it was the resistors of Black Mesa that advocated all the way to the international level to codify in international law the concept of free, prior, and informed consent. And we've been struggling since then to implement that at the local level. And one of the things that works against Indigenous nations fighting for their sovereignty is that we're often pitted against states, our non-Indigenous peoples that we share these spaces and these communities with, as if our exercise of our sovereignty is a threat. But actually it's a protection. It's a protection for a more just way of pursuing development, of pursuing community governance, of pursuing, exercising local authority and sovereignty defined by our own needs, defined by our own visions for our people and for ourselves and for our communities. And we need to learn how to bridge these gaps. And in several places, they're starting to enter into these conversations, but that's why I say these spaces have so much potential. Understanding those concepts and where they originated from and why can help people better understand how the system of power works against that type of collective organizing and that type of exercising of local governance authority. But it also shows us the potential that we have.
Hi, good evening. My name is Nina Chester. I work with the Navajo Nation Office of the President and the Vice President, and one of my staff assistant assignments is to work in conjunction with the Navajo EPA, US EPA, Navajo Abandoned Mine and Lands, USDOE, on uranium cleanup, abandoned uranium mine cleanup. Sorry, I didn't expect to speak. And so there are over 500 abandoned uranium mines on the Navajo Nation, and during the Wexman hearings before Congress, our president at the time asked that Congress do something about the open mines. And so by directive, US EPA has taken the lead and has assisted the Navajo Nation in finding, completing settlements with the PRPs, which are potentially responsible parties. And so all of the investigations were done in a legal setting and the settlements were paid out. If a PRP was identified, the PRP paid. If, well, they have a lot of orphan mines, which is a large portion of the mines that have yet to be identified and then pursued, then that will be paid out of the settlement from a trust fund that is out of DOJ. So I just wanted to make that clarification because I think it's important. Sorry.
The answer to that question is a resounding no. The mines that we visited today, the operators, the developers of those mines years ago created this destruction, created this havoc, and were allowed to walk away without any responsibilities. And this is due mainly to the fact that the United States still has on the books the 1872 Hard Mining Act that allows those companies to not have to do any cleanup. So as long as the government is in collusion with the industry, where am I hearing that word collusion? The answer will remain no. The same situation out here on Navajo when the BHP mine was shutting down, the Navajo government allowed BHP to walk away without any responsibilities for any liabilities past, present, or future. That is ludicrous. When our tribal government says that let's keep those power plants going because we need those dollars, because we need those jobs, well, the recognition that the candle on the other end is burning quicker than from this end, because as long as we keep those power plants running, we're burning the future of our children. So the answer is no.
So we've been talking about the Gold King spill a lot and threats in the Animas River. And I'm wondering if, with the raised awareness of environmental threats that may have come from the Gold King spill, there's also the coal mines. As Chile mentioned, there's mercury in Navajo Reservoir. There's the Four Corners methane hotspot. We're living under the highest concentration of methane anywhere. And so there's invasive species along the river corridors. There are other threats. I'm curious from the three of you or anybody else who might know or have an opinion. I'm curious about the public's perception of threats, of environmental threats. And so other than contaminants in the river, maybe those that I just mentioned or others, are there other threats that have become big topics of conversation or on people's radar? And if so, what are those main threats of concern in your communities?
Thank you very much for that question, because one of the things that we advocate for, especially through our watershed work, is for everyone to take into consideration the cumulative impact and exposure that we're all experiencing. We are so, and this is part of our conditioning, not only through the way we look at jobs and how to create jobs, but also through our education systems, right? One of the things I've always had gripes with is you have to choose a focus. You can't start looking at all of these things and make the question too complex, but that's our reality. And that's been the fundamental difference between the way Indigenous peoples look at our relationship and our interconnection to the environment and the way the Western approach looks at and defines those same things. It's incumbent upon us, because no one else is going to do that work. It's incumbent upon us to do that research and understand how those things are interlinked and how they impact our four sacred elements: land, air, fire, and water. And how it then connects and impacts our lives and our future generations. No one's going to answer that question for us. They're not going to change the way they educate our youth or our professionals. That's where the power lies in the community action groups and the community organizers, because we have that freedom. And it's a daunting responsibility, and sometimes that's why most people shy away from it, because it can become overwhelming. But once you connect these things, you cannot hide that truth from yourself anymore. And we can become better advocates for understanding how these things are interconnected and how they all impact our air, especially our air and our water. And what our responsibility is to maintain awareness to that, to teach our children that truth, and to prepare each other and one another for how we respond and build better solutions to that. One of the things that reoccurs in spaces like this, and Dennis McKellen from the state of New Mexico was bringing up several times on our tour, we have to take a holistic approach to understanding what our issues are. We have to do that, and a basic component of doing that in terms of the water issues and what we're looking at, and even with the fracking and the hotspots, is looking at our watersheds and connecting with each other according to those natural boundaries, those real boundaries that really do show our interconnection to one another and our shared investment in taking on these issues and building solutions for them. There's no other way. And this is why I say it's, conversations like this have a lot of potential to building and inspiring a movement at a larger level, because at the international level, with the talks at the UN and the high-level political forum on meeting the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, you have these professionals from all around the world sitting there looking at all of these 17 target areas and trying to answer the question, how are these connected? How can we bring a holistic perspective to developing the solutions to that? And I keep telling them it's not gonna start with them, it's gonna start with us. And it's gonna require them to listen to the people and the communities that are dealing with these cumulative impacts and that have the audacity to build solutions to them, defined by ourselves.